Hello co-community, hello YouTube, it's Chibi Pirate here, and today I'm going to be reading the style guide for the Worldbuilders Community Mapping Competition 2026. Guidelines for map makers from 1v1 to 4v4 and things to consider. Here's my note. This style guide remains much the same as it was originally written 2 years ago. Since then, much about Co3 has changed. New maps are larger, like Powder Keg, or narrower, like Red Ball Express. They're narrower than before, like Red Ball Express. There are more choices in fuel and munition point values, shapes, and sizes. There are even punishing territory maps in 4v4, like Powder Keg, that reward tenacity and hyper-aggressive play right outside your opponent's base. Will has dramatically pushed the boundaries of resource quantities with maps like Gabis Gap, which has, I think, 66 fuel, which is insane. But whether it's to learn the rules for the first time or bring them to the front of your mind once again, so as to bend, break, or shatter them, I suggest you look through this document at least once as you make your map. Go big and go bold, but know thy task. Welcome, mappers! This document contains requirements, recommendations, and resourceful advice for creating your map or maps for the Worldbuilders why does this trip me up so much? So this document contains resourceful advice and requirements and recommendations for creating your map or maps for the Worldbuilders Community Mapping Competition 2026. If you'd prefer a video format, which you're watching right now, tune in here. As you read this, keep in mind that there are other resources that can aid you in map design, such as Relic's Mapmaking 101, and various other sources in the Company of Heroes 3 Map-Making Resources document. So the first step, finding inspiration, theme, and size. Well, yeah, size, but not in the map size part. That's the second section here. So, yeah, before getting started, find a setting, find an idea. Will your map be in Italy, or North Africa, or something in between? Take inspiration from history, photographs, or art or architecture. Is there a prominent natural feature like a cliff face, waterfall, canyon, or beach that you want to depict? How many players do you want to make your map? Keep in mind that 1v1 maps are the most technically difficult due to balance considerations, but require less ground to cover, while 4v4 maps are the exact opposite. Balance doesn't take a backseat in larger modes, but there will be less quibbling about the precise details of a bicycle or a tree or a car at half health. An urban 2-player format might be a reasonable expectation for this competition, but 2 8-player urban maps from scratch might require too many hours given the time constraints set out for this competition and your own schedule. Now, map size. This is really important, that's why there's so many words here. But your map size is really dependent on the number of players. There are 3 important values: the terrain size, the playable area, and the smaller core or combat area to consider. Values in the table below are a range of acceptable values for length and width in meters, not the exact dimensions of maps. The numbers in parentheses are 32 by 32 meter square grids for easier math, which is an overlay holdover from Co1 and Co2 map making. These ranges come from Relic maps accessible in the Essence editor. So those are the ones that when you open a new map, it can ask for a blank canvas or open an existing one. But that's also as of 2 years ago. I don't know if that feature's been updated or not. But the maps are still in the game, so they're still relevant, at least to some degree. But note that Will, also known as Monolithic Bacon, recommends a maximum of 880 meters for terrain size on one side. Keep in mind that this value is always the long side of a rectangle, with the other side usually considerably shorter. So, a little brief addition here. Powder Keg approaches the 880 meter limit with a terrain size of 800 by 800, a playable area of 576 by 576, and a core area of 512 by 512. The map feels so large because the bases are placed in the corners, allowing for the longest possible midline. On the other side of the picture, many of the 1v1 maps released in the 2.0 anniversary update back in February 2025 are the same size as the Co1 or Co2 inspiration, which means they're actually smaller than kind of these recommended values I have for a 1v1 map. Update 2.2 Scarlet Bison added players to Jebel Pass, Samoa and Road to Primosole, without changing their overall size. So that's where, when you're in this kind of team game territory, things can get a little dicey. So it's not an exact science. So when choosing your map size and eventually your kind of layout of the map, how you're having the bases and things like that, keep in mind the distance to the center line between each team's base. A perfectly square map with HQs and corners, like Powder Keg, will have a longer distance than if you place them along opposite edges of your map square. If your map is too long, retreats will be too punishing and it will be a chore for players to get back to the center of the map. On the other hand, if your map is too short, a retreat might not be punishing enough. Keep in mind that Co-3 provides opportunities for all factions to reinforce and heal in the field. As a mapper, you have to find a balance for many things in order to create the most fun and fair landscape. Another note for myself. Consult Relic maps in the editor for an accurate idea of the size you want. Your terrain size should always be larger than your playable area, which in turn should always be larger than your core or combat area. Placing large objects or terrain deformations along the sides of your map shrinks your combat area. Twin Beaches and Road to Tunis, for example, are identical in terrain size and playable area, but they play so differently in great part due to differences in the size and shape of the core area. Terrain size is also a significant factor in performance in the editor. Back when I was working on Hill 209, just after Co3 launched, its terrain size was 864 by 864, and I encountered significant performance issues very early in the development process, with barely anything on the map. It's just molten terrain. But 2 years ago, I had a relatively new 12th gen Intel CPU and 3070 Ti, and I know they're on the 40 or 50 series now, and there's AMD chips there which I don't really have a context for, but keep in mind that people are playing on PCs with like a worse CPU and GPU than this. They're the Co3 minimum requirements are actually quite accommodating. So we don't want to be breaking the bank on performances, especially when we get to those 4v4 maps. Now, Section 3, Territory Layout and Resources. There are a few things to consider for creating a territory layout in a map designed for competitive play. They are A, balanced but not necessarily identical territory layouts. B, the quantity of resources on a map remains relatively consistent across all sizes of maps. C, placement of territory points ought to create a capping or capture order for players from their base. D, the middle line of your map, where every point along its length is equidistant from both teams' HQs or individual bases, or team bases, will almost certainly have the most action. Therefore, that midline is where you want to put equally contestable points. Most commonly, you will find points along the line in this order: victory points, fuel, and then strategic or munition. E, base size is large enough for all players and their tech structures. HQs should, generally speaking, be close enough together within a base so that they can share a healing structure. And this is really important in 2v2. 3v3 you can kind of get away with it, but again, I think in 4v4, players like having their kind of natural partner have a medical tent or whatever, med bunker, whatever you call it, kind of between each base, so only one player has to put those resources into the shared healing. And then some notes about each letter here. So A, it's often easiest to duplicate points from one side of the map to the other. While this can be effective and balanced, some variation is encouraged. Territory points should look to be a part of your map, not an arbitrary and awkward spot determined by coordinates on a Cartesian plane. However, the territory layout often comes first in a competitive map, so you have to be building your map around the points. Again, that's not a requirement. That's generally, I think, what a lot of people do. But some people put a landscape in first and then put the points in after. It's up to you, but like I said, we don't want perfectly identical points on one half of the map and on the other. We want some variation. We want it to feel like an organic space, not like a video game. So B, the correct amount of resources is important for timing across all maps and player counts. All maps should have approximately 80 munitions and 40 fuel as a minimum. Generally speaking, maps tend to overshoot the target rather than undershoot, so 82 or 85 munitions is common, sometimes even 90. In 3 vs 3 and 4 vs 4 map from Relic, you'll encounter 45 fuel like on Winterline and Mignano Gap, or even 50 fuel like in Monte Cavo. Gabas Gap has a staggering 66 fuel, which is partially mitigated by aggressive cutoffs. In smaller maps, it may be possible to have higher amounts of fuel, so long as the extra fuel is vulnerable to capture or it is easily cut off. An older version of Capen's 1v1 Tuscan Vineyards, for example, had 50 fuel with much of it along the center line of the map. Larger maps will have many plus 5 points, while smaller maps will have many plus 10 or some plus 16 points. A plus 16 point on a 3v3 or 8-player map is discouraged because there's just too much ground to cover. You can pull it off, it's possible, but you might see like 1 plus 16 munition at most. Whereas on some 1v1 maps, you might have a couple of those, or even a plus 16 fuel point here or there. So letter C. A clear capping order or multiple potential capping orders forces players to make decisions. And gaming is all about decisions. Not just video gaming, but like games in general. So does the player prioritize their own resources first? A quick route to a VP, an important building, a fast attack on an opponent's cutoff, or force an early engagement on their opponent's fuel or munitions point? Capping orders are created not only by their location, but their value too. Placement of points and how important they are helps shape the flow of battle as units gravitate to and between capture points. D. The center line is a guiding line for balance in gameplay. All 3 victory points don't need to be on the line exactly, but they ought to be relatively close so it's not unreasonable for one team to be able to capture all 3. If VPs are too safe, then games played on the map will tend to be longer and, depending on other factors, fighting may concentrate over the middle VP. Placing fuel or munition points along the center line can be a good practice too, but it shouldn't be too crowded. This is also the space where you will want the most detailed or most beautiful parts of your map, because it's where players and livestream viewers will be seeing the most of it. Cutoffs are important to create in your map's territory map, especially for 1v1 maps. It is best to keep them far from the opposing team's base and keep strong buildings away from them so they are more easily taken. As you add more players, cutoffs may be less punishing as safer fuels keep teams in the fight for longer. Originality shouldn't be forgotten either. Don't be afraid to bend the rules or try something that you don't see in other Co3 maps of the same player count. A safe victory point layout could be balanced with fuel points that are easy to contest, with much of it vulnerable to capture or disruption. Using existing layouts can be useful, but simply copying an existing layout might be an extra hurdle to overcome when Relic is considering your map for integration into the game. And I just want to add that, once again, this kind of rule about cutoffs, it's like a recommendation, because about having a cutoff far from the opposing team's base and keeping strong buildings away from them so they're more easily taken, it can apply, but also not. You might want like that. You might want a 70 fuel map, but a team only kind of, they're always fighting over like 30 fuel, or it can be cut off really easily. So just be creative, but know the rules before you break them. That's all. I'll keep saying that. I think that's very important. Section 4, map flow. Okay. Apart from the territory layout, creating points of interest, obstacles... Sorry, I'll restart there. Apart from the territory layout itself creating points of interest, obstacles like rocks, hills, high walls, hedges, buildings, and deep water create an overall flow to a map. Maps have all sorts of variety here, and this is where your creativity and testing will shine through. Even wide open maps like Road to Tunis have opportunities to hide behind high walls, while a map like Campbell's Convoy has some small spots to gain a height advantage against your enemy. Dense urban maps like Torrente will have wide streets and open squares, connected by relatively narrow alleyways and gates between homes or high walls. Keep in mind that unlike Co1 or Co2, buildings can be traversable when they are destroyed. Also note that the standard vision and firing range of units is 35 meters. Maps that promote the most variety of units will have a balance between long, about 40 meters or more, and short, 30 meters or less, firing and sight lines. Even if you have, why is a 30-meter sight line a short range? Well, you also have to take into account player reaction time. So if you have a 30-meter distance in a combat area, you're in combat right away. If you have a 50-meter distance, you might have scouting units able to see your enemy coming from afar, and you'll have time to react and reposition and things like that. So even though I'd say just definitely play the game a little bit. I know that's something I can, as a mapper, I can kind of fall into, is like, I'm mapping, but I'm not keeping up with the patch notes, not keeping up with the updates. I don't know how one faction plays or two factions play, or I only play Axis. It's like, have a bit more diversity in your understanding of the game, have some diverse game knowledge. Where are we? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The center of your map should be able to accommodate all players. Especially in team games, you might have up to all 8 players operating around the center line and even the central VP of your map. I'm thinking of like LML Alpha. It has this huge central area. And I've played 4v4s on that where I have sometimes all 8 players in that space or just outside of it. In 6-player and 8-player maps, even 4-player maps, remember that many players will be reinforcing, healing, and repairing close to the center line in order to stay engaged and prevent VP loss. Your map flow and cover just behind the center line should allow for players to be able to utilize those areas to stay in the fight and not be too safe from attack. You don't want a kind of wide open center space, but a kind of really crazy maze getting to that center, because if one team takes the middle, they just have to put up a few machine guns in a bunker and a few mines, and all of a sudden they've won the game easy peasy. And we want to have some back and flow, some back and forth, some good flow between equally matched teams. GB's note. Again, look to existing maps for examples. How narrow is too narrow based on your experience playing the game? How boring is a wide open space with no sight or shot blockers? What can you add to break up an expensive desert or a field of vineyards? What can you add to an urban map to make long-range units and weapon teams useful? Number 5, pathfinding and cover. Very important for gameplay here. Heavily related to the previous point, part of a good map flow is smooth pathfinding and cover placement. Pathfinding is probably most crucial for light vehicles whose role is often a shock unit in the early game, but rely on speed and distance from enemy units to survive as time goes on. Don't neglect medium crush vehicles either. Nobody wants to see their precious Crusader tank spinning in circles, especially if it's their first one. That first medium tank can be a big game changer. You don't want it to die on a big tree stump that you can barely see, or a rock submerged underneath the ground. It's good practice to group together objects with the same crush to prevent the creation of maze-like paths. This principle applies to lengthy move blockers like hedgerows too. When it comes to cover placement, the majority of entities placed in your map provide light or heavy cover. Each has their own crush type. Cover is most important for infantry, but sometimes the sturdier entities like a stone wall or a metal car can protect vehicles from anti-tank weapons. Keep in mind that infantry can vault over low walls, but team weapons cannot. Light and heavy cover is often absent from the capture zones of territory points to force players to choose between capping points and minimizing damage or winning engagements, but in other cases, cover is placed deliberately in capture points. Think about, in later tests, how a map's flow is impacted by cover and how your cover impacts map flow and vice versa. It's a never-ending cycle. Sturdy green cover that cannot be flanked isn't fun to play against, but easily flankable cover provides interesting counterplay. Here's another quick note from me. To check different crush types, tick the appropriate box in the Impasse Paint tool, then apply the pathfinding overlay by deselecting the Impasse tool. Don't forget to press Refresh Alt to update the pathfinding map after you move or place objects around. Lastly, environment and art. Okay, you want your map not only to play well, but you want it to look good too. Don't be afraid of mixing multiple tiles and decorating them with splats and splines and strip component splines, sorry. Their color and opacity can be changed to create unique but realistic appearances, like in previous co-titles. There are also a plethora of tiles to choose from, most of which have fine details. There are a few kind of holdover or lower resolution ones from previous games, but these can still be useful if they're blended well. Variety is important so players and viewers don't get easily bored and can immediately identify which part of the map they're looking at. This was a significant piece of advice, feedback I received for Hill 209 and for Jebel Pass. Splats, strip component splines, and different mixtures of tiles are major components of how you make your map unique, look believable, and elevate it to the next level. Even if you're committed to a real-life location, make sure there's enough variety in your map to make it interesting. And again, art, it's one of the most time-consuming parts of map making. Don't neglect it. 4v4 maps require the most amount of time spent on art because they are the largest. Section 7 here, atmosphere settings. Lighting and atmosphere directly impact the aesthetic quality of your map. There is a lot to say here, but I recommend looking at Relic's Co3 modding hub to explain how different values interact with each other. Broadly speaking, your map should be well lit and the sun not too low so as to cast long distracting shadows, but not so high that it flattens textures. You don't want your units washed out as if they're under a bright spotlight. Stick to natural looking light colors for this competition. The best part about atmospheres is that you can copy them from Relic made maps open in the Essence editor. You can also save them or your own atmospheres to be used in future projects. Don't be afraid, note here from myself, don't be afraid to change the LUT map of your atmosphere. This greatly changes the way the units and environment appear. Some, like the Alamein LUT, add a lot more color, while the standard bright LUT maps tend to wash out color but improve visibility. And I'd suggest sticking with those bright LUT maps because Relic uses variations of those in almost all of their atmospheres. No matter what you pick, make sure it doesn't hinder gameplay and complements all the hard work you've done. Your map can have many atmospheres in the editor, but the one at the top of the list is what will be loaded in game. You can create an atmosphere transition from the starting one to another one, but additional transitions are impossible in victory point matches. See details and transitions in the Worldbuilders Discord. I've got a link to a post right there for you for your convenience. And that's all, folks. Again, all my documents have this kind of series of links down here, and the video links will be updated to the proper videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, so it's a bit of a little circle. There's too many words. But yeah, so I hope you've liked my reading of this. I hope you enjoy the competition, make some maps, try some new things, refine some old things. Yeah, have fun. I'm looking forward to see what you create and working with you all in these next 7 or 8, I think 8 months. I don't know. Like I said, math is hard, okay? Anyway, take care. Thank you. Worldbuilders Community Mapping Competition 2026. Thank you and goodbye. See you in Discord. See you on the CO3 battlefield. Adieu. Adieu.